If you are dealing with a narcissist, the most important thing to understand is that they are not interacting with you in a normal or healthy way. You approach relationships with the belief that they are built on mutual respect, balance, and shared understanding. This perspective allows meaningful human connections to exist. However, the narcissist operates from a completely different mindset. Their entire approach is not centered on cooperation. It revolves around control. A narcissist's primary goal in any interaction is to gain power, admiration, validation, and self-confirmation strictly on their own terms. If achieving that requires bending the truth, they will do it without hesitation. If it involves gaslighting you into questioning your own perception, they will proceed without a second thought. If it requires weakening your confidence so you become easier to influence and control, that is exactly what they will pursue, and they will feel no remorse about it. This is what makes them so destructive. Many people wrongly assume that if they show enough kindness, practice extreme patience, or clearly communicate their feelings, the narcissist will eventually understand and change. That belief is an illusion. A narcissist does not respond to logic, respectful dialogue, or moral reasoning. They only respond to consequences. If you fail to recognize this reality, you will find yourself trapped in endless frustration, growing self-doubt, and deep emotional exhaustion. So how do you apply this awareness in a practical way? The first step is to start observing patterns of behavior instead of listening to words. Narcissists are highly skilled at saying exactly what you want to hear. They will promise change, pretend to feel regret, and even portray themselves as victims to keep you emotionally invested. But the real question is always this: what do their actions consistently show? If there is a repeated pattern of dishonesty, manipulation, or disrespect, then that pattern is the truth, regardless of what they say. The second step is recognizing the psychological tactics they use to maintain control. One of the most subtle yet damaging tactics is gaslighting, which slowly erodes your trust in your own perception of reality. They may strongly deny saying something even when you have proof. They might gradually reshape past events until you find yourself apologizing for something that was never your fault. The more time and energy you invest in trying to prove your point, the more control they gain. The act of defending yourself places you in a reactive position, meaning they are controlling the direction of the interaction. Another common tactic is intermittent reinforcement, where moments of kindness are mixed with periods of coldness or cruelty in an unpredictable pattern. This creates a powerful psychological effect similar to addiction. If someone is consistently unkind, you eventually distance yourself. But when small moments of warmth appear occasionally, your mind becomes fixated on those moments. You begin hoping that if you behave correctly, you will receive more of that positive treatment. This creates an unhealthy attachment where you stay, not because the relationship is fulfilling, but because you are chasing those brief, controlled rewards. Then there is projection. A narcissist will often accuse you of the very traits or behaviors they themselves display. If they are dishonest, they may label you as a liar. If they are emotionally unstable, they might claim that you are the irrational one. This serves two purposes. It diverts attention away from their behavior and keeps you occupied with defending yourself, preventing you from clearly seeing what is actually happening. Understanding these tactics is not about becoming paranoid or distrustful. It is about gaining clarity and seeing reality without distortion. Once you recognize the pattern, you stop being an active participant in their manipulation. When you stop playing their game, they begin to lose their influence over you. If you truly want to avoid being controlled, manipulated, and emotionally drained, the first step is to see the narcissist as they truly are, not as who you wish they could become. The truth may feel uncomfortable, but it is always more useful than a comforting illusion. One of the most damaging traps people fall into is seeking approval from a narcissist. This does not only mean obvious attempts to impress them, it includes subtle behavioral changes made to avoid criticism, gain small bits of validation, or finally receive the respect you deserve. This pattern is easy to fall into because human beings are naturally wired for connection. In any relationship, whether personal or professional, you expect your efforts to be acknowledged. You assume that if you communicate clearly, show loyalty, and remain patient, the other person will eventually respond positively. But with a narcissist, that moment never comes. They do not operate on mutual exchange. Instead, they interpret your efforts as evidence that they have control over you. Every time you adjust yourself to avoid their disapproval, you reinforce their sense of power. Every time you wait for their validation, you hand over control of your self-worth. If you believe there is some perfect combination of actions or words that will finally make them recognize your value, you are wasting your energy. For them, the standard is always shifting. Just when you think you have done enough, they will introduce a new expectation that you were never meant to meet. The key realization is this: it is not about you. Their inability to respect or value you is not a reflection of your worth. It is a result of their own deep psychological issues. Their self-image is fragile and built on an unstable sense of superiority that requires constant reinforcement. They cannot accept being wrong because it threatens their internal illusion. They cannot genuinely value others because doing so would mean giving up control. As a result, they move through life manipulating, minimizing, and using others as a way to maintain their inflated self-image. Once you fully understand this, the path forward becomes clearer. You need to detach emotionally, mentally, and when possible, physically. This process begins with a crucial step. Stop seeking their approval in any form. This does not mean becoming hostile or acting out of bitterness. It means removing yourself from the psychological dynamics they rely on. In practical terms, it means you stop explaining or justifying yourself to them. A narcissist thrives on arguments because arguments validate their sense of importance. The moment you start defending your actions, the focus shifts to their perspective rather than your reality. Instead of trying to correct their misunderstandings, you recognize that they are not interested in understanding you. They are only listening for ways to maintain control. It also means letting go of the need for closure. This is particularly difficult because people naturally seek resolution. You may hope for a moment where they admit their mistakes, apologize sincerely, and acknowledge your experience. But that moment is unlikely to happen. The longer you wait for it, the longer you remain emotionally tied to them. True closure comes from your own decision to disengage, to accept reality as it is, and to move forward without their acknowledgement. Perhaps most importantly, it means redefining where your sense of worth comes from. If you have spent a long time adjusting yourself to meet the expectations of someone who cannot truly value you, it is time to reclaim that sense of self. Your worth does not depend on another person's recognition. It is something you establish internally. The moment you begin to see your own value clearly, the narcissist loses the leverage they once had over you. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with a narcissist is assuming that fairness, logic, and goodwill will protect them. This belief is based on the assumption that the narcissist shares the same values and intentions. In reality, they do not. Most people enter disagreements believing that through honest communication, a shared understanding can be reached. They assume there is a common reality that both sides can agree upon if discussed openly. However, a narcissist does not engage in conflict with the goal of understanding or resolution. They engage with the intention of winning, controlling, or maintaining dominance. This fundamental difference is why traditional approaches to communication often fail with them. When you try to apply normal relationship rules to an abnormal dynamic, you end up confused, drained, and stuck in a cycle that never improves. Recognizing this difference is not about giving up on people. It is about protecting your mental and emotional well-being by responding to reality rather than expectation. But a narcissist has no real interest in reaching agreement. Their focus is on winning. This is where you need to stop making the mistake of thinking that being the more noble person, being endlessly patient, or always understanding will eventually create a breakthrough. It simply will not. Because to a narcissist, your willingness to engage, to keep explaining, to keep justifying your behavior, and to keep hoping for a reasonable outcome is not viewed as strength. It is seen as weakness. It becomes an opening, something that signals to them that they still have influence over your thoughts, your emotions, and your decisions. It shows them you are still involved in their game, even if you are unaware of it. So what should you do differently? You need to stop reacting in the ways they expect. You must stop feeding them the emotional energy they rely on. Because this is a key point. Narcissists are not internally stable. They do not create their own sense of identity, confidence, or self-worth. Instead, they draw it from others. This is why they provoke, manipulate, and create unnecessary conflict. It is all part of a desperate effort to keep you engaged because engagement gives them power. If you want to weaken a narcissist's hold on you, you have to take that power away. And that begins with learning something that sounds simple, but is extremely challenging in practice: emotional detachment. This does not mean suppressing your emotions completely because that would be unhealthy. It means developing the ability to remain steady and unaffected by their deliberate attempts to provoke you. It means recognizing that their efforts to guilt you, to pull you into arguments, or to make you defend yourself are all strategies designed to keep you under their influence. This is where the idea of gray rocking becomes important. It is a psychological approach where you make yourself as uninteresting, unemotional, and disengaged as possible when interacting with a narcissist. They depend on reactions, whether it is anger, frustration, sadness, or even affection, because reactions confirm they still have control. But when you refuse to react, when you deny them the emotional response they are seeking, they begin to lose their advantage. Without that reaction, they lose interest and often move on. However, this is not easy. It is extremely difficult to remain calm in front of someone who is intentionally trying to provoke you. It is not easy to hear false accusations and choose not to defend yourself. It is not easy to watch someone twist reality and damage your reputation and simply respond with, "Believe whatever you want." But it is necessary, because every time you engage, every time you argue back, every time you try to prove your worth to someone who is not interested in truth, you are feeding the very cycle that is draining you. This kind of response requires strong psychological discipline. It is the ability to say to yourself that you do not need this person's approval. You do not need to correct every false narrative they create. You do not need to prove your value in their eyes. And when you reach that level of detachment, you become extremely difficult to control, because a narcissist cannot manipulate what they cannot provoke. In the end, the most effective response to a narcissist is not anger or confrontation. It is indifference. When they realize they can no longer pull you into their chaos, they begin to lose interest. And that is when you start to regain your freedom. One of the biggest dangers when dealing with a narcissist is becoming trapped in the endless cycle of conflict they create. You may believe that if you can just make them understand your point, if you can finally prove your case, if you can get them to admit their behavior, then things will improve. This belief is an illusion. A narcissist does not argue to resolve anything. They argue to dominate. Their goal is not truth, not understanding, and not even logical consistency. Their goal is to keep you engaged, emotionally involved, and reactive. Because as long as you are reacting, you are still participating in their game. And as long as you are in their game, they maintain influence over you. Think about how these situations usually unfold. You bring up a genuine concern. Something they did that was hurtful, dishonest, or disrespectful. A reasonable person might listen, even if they disagree. They would at least try to understand your point of view. But a narcissist behaves differently. They deflect responsibility, they shift blame onto you, they bring up unrelated issues from the past, they twist your words, they accuse you of being the problem. Before you realize it, the conversation has completely shifted. You are no longer discussing their behavior. Instead, you are defending yourself. And this is exactly where they gain the upper hand. The moment you begin defending yourself, the focus is no longer on their actions. It is now on your character. They have successfully turned the situation around. Now you are the one under scrutiny, spending your energy trying to justify yourself in a situation that was never meant to be fair. So how do you break out of this pattern? You disengage. You stop defending yourself. You stop explaining. You stop trying to win a discussion that was designed for you to lose. This does not mean you accept poor treatment. It does not mean you tolerate disrespect. It means you refuse to participate in a system that is built against you. It also means setting clear and firm boundaries. A narcissist thrives on emotional instability and will push constantly to keep you off balance. If you say you will not accept being spoken to in a certain way, they will test you to see if you truly mean it. If you say you will not engage in a certain type of argument, they will try to provoke you until you break your own rule. Because if they can make you react, they regain control. They prove that your boundaries are not real. This is why consistency matters. If you say you will end a conversation, then you must end it. If you say you will not tolerate disrespect, then you must walk away when it happens. If you say you will not explain yourself endlessly, then you have to stop explaining. The moment a narcissist realizes their usual tactics no longer work, they begin to lose interest. You are no longer the easy target they once saw. But the most difficult part is staying firm in the face of discomfort. It requires you to tolerate the urge to correct lies about you. It requires you to resist defending yourself when your reality is being twisted. It requires you to accept that they may never acknowledge the truth, not because they cannot, but because they choose not to. And you must become okay with that. Your peace, your integrity, and your self-respect do not depend on their validation. They depend on your ability to walk away from pointless arguments, to refuse engagement, and to prioritize your own well-being over the illusion of winning. Because ultimately, the real victory is not proving a narcissist wrong. It is proving to yourself that you no longer need their approval at all. There is also a hard truth you must accept. A narcissist will not respect your boundaries unless you enforce them. And enforcement does not mean repeatedly explaining your boundaries, hoping they will eventually understand. It does not mean making threats you never follow through on. It does not mean expecting them to suddenly become self-aware and change their behavior. It means taking action. It means creating real consequences. A healthy person, when told that their behavior is unacceptable, will at least pause and consider what has been said. They may not agree, but they will usually respect your right to set limits. A narcissist sees boundaries differently. They see them as challenges, obstacles, and tests. They will keep pushing to find out how far they can go. They are looking for the point where you give in. This is why partial effort does not work. If you set a boundary but fail to enforce it, you teach them that your words have no weight. You show them that with enough pressure, enough guilt, or enough persistence, you will eventually back down. Once they learn this, they will continue to push those limits again and again. True enforcement means being willing to end conversations that cross your boundaries. It means removing yourself from situations that are unhealthy, even if it feels uncomfortable in the moment. It means understanding that you do not need to argue endlessly to justify your position. You simply need to act in alignment with your boundaries. And this is where most people struggle because taking action is difficult. It creates discomfort, tension, and sometimes temporary loss, but it is the only way to break free from the cycle. Setting and enforcing boundaries means accepting a difficult truth. The narcissist will react poorly. They will accuse you of being selfish, harsh, or unfair. They will shift into victim mode. They will lash out because their goal is never to respect your boundaries. Their only objective is to make you feel guilty enough to abandon them. This is the point where you must develop the strength to sit with discomfort and continue doing what is right for your own well-being. You have to accept that once you begin enforcing